Welcome to a Pillow Away podcast with Cindy and Dave Carver. This is a continuation of our topic, Covid-19 pandemic, a look back.
It was definitely made with agave. It smelled like tequila.
So it smelled like tequila?
It did. It definitely smelled like tequila. But it also ended up being the ones recalled because it had something in it that was bad for you. And I don't know what was in some of those that made it smell so horrible. I mean, those bottles are going to be around in 25 years when someone opens those up. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, this smells terrible. And I'm like, it smelled that way from day one. I mean, you couldn't even use them on your hands. They were so gross. So the tequila one, I don't remember what was in it that was bad, but it smelled good. I didn't mind that one.
At the end of the day, you came home, had a margarita. It was all a good day.
You're
right?
all good.
Yeah, all a good day.
What, are you drinking or is that a tequila sanitizer?
Yeah, but even back then, nobody cared at that point because all we cared about was surviving at that point.
Right. So
Isn't that the strangest feeling as an emergency response professional for over 20 plus years? Well, you and I, since our entire career, short of my short time period of being in retail, but the weirdest feeling of we have to survive because we're the ones that go. We're the ones that send people to go. We're the ones, if we don't make it, we're all doomed.
Well, it was one of those things where when you talk to people that worked from home, you know, maybe they worked from home a week and then half their staff went back to work. You know, they staggered who came to work. There were pods, you know, that people were kept in, you know, to keep, you know, other germs and COVID germs away from them. I don't know what any of that was like because we were the emergency response people, policemen, firemen, doctors, nurses, you know, hospital personnel. We were the only ones out, to be honest with you.
Right.
And you could feel that. I mean, I knew that.
Yeah, and I think what I was trying to convey is it just your thoughts and your words inspired me to think of the career field as a whole, and especially with doctors and nurses and hospital staff thrown into this because of the pandemic. But to think of it as a whole, it really changed the mindset of all of those folks that dealt with everybody in public being sick.
Right.
And I know not everybody got COVID, and
Super sick.
I know there's people that are going to listen to the podcast that are saying, "Well, I never got COVID, I never got sick." Okay, I get it, but everybody's a catch-all. Maybe I meant the majority of the people we knew, everyone got sick.
Right. And they would get sick in waves again. So you would see, you know, or people were sick and you didn't know it because they didn't tell you, you know, you didn't see on, you know, not everyone posted on social media when you had COVID. I mean, not everybody did that. There were friends of ours where, you know, 3-4 weeks later in conversation, you find out that they had COVID. I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't know that you had that happen. I mean, ours, you know, mine wasn't super. I mean, I didn't broadcast it, basically. I didn't make a huge deal, but yours was definitely a big deal.
Yeah, and I posted mine because it was kind of my way of dealing with fear. And I'll admit it, a year later, it actually scared the crap out of me. I mean, I've been shot at. I've been stabbed, I've been spit on, I've been attacked, I've been in riots as a police officer. None of those things scared me. I've had cancer. I had testicular cancer at the age of 32, and that didn't bother me. But lying to you about how healthy I was.
Did you hear that? He lied.
I did. I did lie. I lied for a week about where I was at.
Which was laying in bed thinking that he was going to die, which is not his nature. That's not how he thinks, and that's not anything that I've ever seen him do. And he didn't tell me some of the symptoms he was having, like chest pain. We should have been in the hospital. I should have taken him to the hospital at least a week before.
But in my defense, some of that was paranoia induced. That paranoia was induced by the fact that I didn't sleep well for about a week.
Well, yeah, because you were so sick.
And then when we did seek help, they gave me medicine that made it worse.
Well, okay. So a weekend, we went for a chest x-ray at urgent care, and he was on the right track, sort of. We should have gone to the emergency room, and he would have been admitted had we done that. That person at urgent care sent him home with steroids and a prescription to take them that I've never seen, and no one I talked to had ever seen. You step down on prescriptions. You take 5 the first day, 4, 3. You do that. And his said take 5 like every day for like 3 days. Well, I don't know how anybody survives that. I mean, I think there are some times where that may be warranted, but first of all, he doesn't take any drugs, let alone steroids. I mean, how was he going to sleep taking a dose of 5 steroids for 3 days? So, I get why the steroids were given, because he was having respiratory issues. But
I'll name the steroid in case anybody's curious out there, prednisone. And I've talked
right,
to a
because
lot
that's
of
what
people that
everybody
have taken
that's what they
prednisone.
give everyone.
And I talked to a lot of people after my experience how much paranoia prednisone gave them, or how much it jacked them up, or
Well,
messed with their heart
it's
rates, or
not
what have you.
well, I totally believe that was because of the dose you were taking. I've taken prednisone, and it does jack me up. It also horribly messes with my blood sugar, so it shoots it straight up. So
Cindy, in opposite of me, is a walking database on almost anything pharmaceutical. She's taken more medicine than anyone I know, other than someone in critical care in a hospital. And I do find it fascinating that she's admitted it. She's letting me off the hook a little bit on the lying thing, because I did lie. I didn't tell her the truth. I didn't trust her enough, and I should have. I didn't trust her enough, being a pillow away from her, to tell her how bad I was, because
you're just trying to be brave.
I thought I could get through it, and I thought I was doing all right.
We've already fainted twice.
But she's right.
We've been in the ER.
In my
We've been to
defense,
urgent care.
I don't take medicine for anything.
I know.
I take a couple of naproxen for knee
Yes.
swelling from time to time, and I take an allergy pill because I'm allergic to dogs and cats and what have you, and we have 2 dogs. So I do that, but I don't take anything else, and I've always worn that as a badge of honor. I'm 59, closing in on 60, and I don't have a prescription. Never had one, short of what you might get if you have an infection or something like that. But I've never had a prescription short of the glasses that I'm wearing, and those are technically prescribed. But, that was part of it for me, was that, I didn't tell her the truth. And I didn't trust her enough because I thought I could get through it. I've always been able to get by things. I've never been that sick in my entire life. And I'll round that out and we got to wind this first one down as we move into the second one, because we're at our first half limit. But I'll round that out by saying that my experience is not singular. I'm willing to speak for millions of people in this country that probably felt the exact same way that I did. We know of one who's been to our house who had COVID and didn't tell anybody how desperately sick he was, except for one other person in our community.
All right.
And when he finally made the commitment to go to the hospital, he died.
It was too late.
It was
Too
gone.
late.
Just like me.
There are other people that made that decision too late.
Right. They waited too long, and I think that's what caught everybody off guard. But I want to circle back to where we were with the dispatch part of it as we move into episode number 2. So, continuing the conversation that we're having, and the conversation started as COVID-19 pandemic, a look back. actually, when I came up with the concept and we talked about it the other day, I really thought we were going to have like two probably really clean 30-minute episodes. But episode one had so much information in it. And based on the feedback that we've gotten from you, our listening audience, in just 2 weeks of podcasting, you guys are fascinated by some of the stuff that we can talk about as a couple, that you've probably always wanted to know. And even some of the things that we have a tendency to bury. So, what I was asking Cindy off mic a minute ago was, can you think of anything, an anecdote or some of the experiences that you had through COVID experience, that you had as a dispatcher? Lost my train of thought there for a second. That, maybe we could share in episode two. And I believe your response was,
And it's all dark from here. It's all super dark. Because the pandemic did not get better in EMS, dispatch, police, fire. It just got worse.
now, see, I can say for me, it's a little bit different experience. And it's strange because we both come from this background, but I was not in emergency response at that time. I was a deputy coroner when it first started, but I ended my deputy coroner career right after that. And it was because I was very dedicated to staying at home and staying off the streets, and I didn't go out on those calls. So we have a little bit different background in that, where we went from, let's say, September of 2020 through Christmas of 2020, in that my world wasn't dark. My world was completely different than hers, in that, I worked from home and I worked for a large national retail service provider. So it didn't change much for me other than my job description changed. And then I went from being the guy that was out front often in our relationship to being the support mechanism to you being on the front lines. And that was a different experience for me too. I'll admit that, again, I think I said it in the last episode, that I failed at times, and I'm not afraid to admit it now, because it didn't cause us problems in our relationship any, but because we've been open and we've been honest about it. But I failed at times to recognize some of the things you've gone through, because I went through stuff like that before, and I don't think that way anymore, because that's not the job that I'm in. So I've also never been in the role where I've had to support you. It's always been, in our relationship, you supported me.
All right.
And that role kind of changed. In my mind, that role changed probably around September of 2020, which would have been a good, 5 months into COVID response, more or less.
That would have been like the first, like, surge is what I would call that surge into, October, November, December, which, then it calmed down a little bit, and then it reared its head again in March and came back and surged again. So, I mean, that's how it worked in this community. So I remember two distinct surges of just every call you took was somebody who was sick with some sort of respiratory problem, which probably was COVID. I mean, most people didn't call you, especially older people, and say, I think I have COVID. They didn't really even think about COVID until you asked them the questions. And then, then I think that's when it kind of became more clear to the caller that maybe that's what they had, because there were still people who weren't well versed.
I don't know if you picked that up on the microphone or not, but we are broadcasting from our home studio.
Yes.
Overlooks a beautiful duck pond. It's got duck and geese on it. It's a beautiful sunshiny day today. But we have an 86-pound black lab Dane mix who's standing just outside the studio door, pawing at the door and whining because he's not in here. So if you hear that occasionally, that's what it is. But we're going to continue forward with it. Along the lines of your thought process there, I want to backtrack just slightly, because I distinctly remember, because I was doing it from a different perspective as a retail person. There was a period of time where President Trump was pushing the the end of the lockdown and the return to normal and all of those things. And that was around July 4th holiday,
Right.
because, you couldn't take freedom away from America. So everybody started kind of breaking free from the whole I'm not wearing a mask, I'm going to get together, we're going to shoot fireworks and barbecue and cook out.
Well, and they also, I mean, there was a slowdown because you're not inside so much. I mean, and that happens with just regular
That's right.
flu.
That's right. I forgot the
That's what
season. I forgot the
happens.
seasonal
So your
aspect of it.
season changes, you're outside, kids aren't in school because that's where I think most sicknesses come from is germ schools at schools, parents get it. It comes to work with the parent and then there you have it. So, I mean, that's not a diss on a parent. It's just the way it works.
No, and I
It's
think
just how it works.
every parent knows that. Because we've all done it. I'm a parent of two. We've all done it. Your kids had the sniffles and you send them to school when the reality should be that they don't go to school. But you've got child care issues, you've got job issues. You get it. I think everybody everybody understands it. I think the pandemic actually put all of that under a microscope,
Absolutely.
because people started dying. I mean, we were
Right.
losing people
People
close to
we
us.
knew were sick. Some died. There's, I had an experience where a 35-year-old, his wife had talked to him at 4 in the morning, and when she called 911 at like 7:30 in the morning, he had already passed away. So 3 hours between, speaking to him and waking up in the morning thinking they weren't going to go to work because he was sick. She knew he was sick, but didn't know he was that sick. So it was stuff like that started happening. And this is my personal experience where it scared the crap out of me. It scared me so badly that I was anti-shot until something like that happens. And I literally got the shot less than a week later. So
Well,
it scared me into getting the shot.
part of that anti-shot thing also came along with how local governments began reacting to the vaccination process. When I say began reacting, I'm being very polite about it. The decision to mandate it or not is where I was going.
We
with
were
that.
not mandated. No mandated. That did not happen here.
But we can say, because we live in central Indiana, we know agencies that are around us that did have mandates. We know organizations like hospitals that did
Right.
have
I don't
mandates.
know of any EMS, fire, police, dispatch or anything like that mandated anything like that, but definitely hospitals for sure.
Right. So it wasn't mandated. It was left up to the individual here, but it wasn't like that everywhere. I mean,
No.
I'm willing to say that, I know enough from what I did on the retail side that, some of the challenges that we had on sending retail sales professionals into work was whether or not they were vaccinated. And, we didn't have policies for the company that I worked for. And some of the large brands didn't have policies. So all those decisions had to be made in the background.
And come to find out, it didn't even matter.
It turned out it didn't matter.
Didn't even matter.
And this is not to offer an opinion on
But this is our opinion.
or anti-vax, but it is our opinion because, it didn't really matter. And, here we are 4 years later in hindsight. The Dr. Fauci's of the world have left planet Earth, as far as the Ethernet goes. He's still with us, but he's not out there telling us anything anymore. There's no White House reports any longer. And if you follow the dribs and drabs of news that comes out, and most of us are probably so sick of it, we're not paying any attention to it
I know
anymore.
I
But I
am.
do. I pay attention to it. There's been things released by the NIH. There's been stuff released by the CDC. There's been stuff released by the WHO that it really didn't make any difference whether you were vaccinated or not, other than they have a belief that the vaccine might have shortened the length or the severity of the
Possibly.
infection. And I say belief because I don't know if anybody knows how how to study those statistics and those numbers, but it's always done in hindsight or in retrospect. And you have to take large volumes of numbers and start weeding it down to whatever the narrative is that you're trying to
10
put out
years
there.
from now, we will know those answers.
There you go. That's exactly right. 10 years from now.
10 years, we'll be going, I lived during the COVID pandemic and I did get
I
a
survived
shot.
COVID and
I didn't
all
get a
I got
shot.
was a t-shirt.
I didn't get a shot. So, yeah. So I got the shot. I get it's a 2-shot thing. So I get the first one. I get the second one. And I really think I've had respiratory issues that began with the shot.
Well, it was bizarre that, and I'm
I
glad
think it was somewhat there. I think it exacerbated
I'm glad you brought it up
probably
because you were tested.
asthma.
She had, and we've been together a long time. I honestly had no idea that she had an asthma history. I didn't know it was even in her background until she got the shot.
Right. I think
And then she
it
told me that
exacerbated
she
some
had
things.
asthma, and she talked about albuterol and how she had taken it before.
But it's more allergy induced asthma. So it's not wasn't someone who had to take an albuterol shot every day.
No.
A rescue inhaler. It was more, the older I got, the more allergies I have and the worse those allergies became. And then that became allergy induced asthma. It took lots of testing to figure that out. It took, breathing tests, but I do think the shot exacerbated some things.
Right. And what she left out is that there was a period from September through the end of the year that was just miserable for her and or miserable for the person that's a pillow away from her because she had severe respiratory issues. There were 2 or 3 days where, she would go where it sounded like she was having an asthma attack, but it never went away.
Right.
Simple walking from the living room to the kitchen would cause her to wheeze and breathe. And she was doing her job at the same time doing that. There was, and I'll admit it, I talk about how important it is about that person next to you, but even if they're as committed as I am, I think, or as we're trying to have other people understand how important it is, I think even if you're that as committed to the person next to you, that there are time periods where you're not going to see it.
Well, no, because you're there all the time.
You become numb to it,
Right.
where you're like, well, it's just Cindy.
Just the way it is.
She's got breathing problems and she'll be
Yeah.
okay. And there were times where it flared up, and I would have bet she wasn't going to make it through the night, and then she'd go a few days and be fine again. She tried so many different medicines. She went to multiple different doctors over a time period of probably October through the end of the year. And it really wasn't until she got COVID and had the monoclonal infusion that all of that cleared up. I mean, it took a battle with COVID to get most of those symptoms to go away.
Somewhat, yes. So the infusion fixed the short-term problem. So I went from being sick. I wasn't horribly sick. I wasn't even as sick as he was. I felt bad and I looked bad because when I walked into the doctor's office, they're like, "Ooh, you don't feel well." I'm like, "No." Besides the fact that when you go into the doctor's office, you have to go in the side door.
It's pretty bad when you walk in and they go, "Ooh, you don't look
good." Or you have to go in the side door and they put on the whole,
moon suit.
hazmat suit. It's not a hazmat suit, but there were extra precautions.
They gear up as if
You
they're
went
going
through
to
a side
perform
door.
surgery.
You didn't go in through the door that everybody else did. And I understand why. I get it. They're trying to slow down the spread of it and everything. So, but I still, until, I still have issues and they're not as bad as they used to be. I mean, I did have allergy testing done and it turns out I'm allergic to every tree and grass and weed and I mean, all kinds of anything
Back to episode
back to
2 or 3, I think, where
histamines.
I mentioned that she doesn't do anything
Histamines.
outdoors, like she doesn't plant anything.
Like the minute they put the histamine on my arm, it started to swell up and itch, and it was absolutely the worst thing that I was allergic to, which I could have told them that. So, anyway, I think the problems that I had were exacerbated and brought forward and progressed asthma, allergy induced asthma. I think the shot kind of messed with that.
Did the
I really
dispatch
do.
center ever do the forehead temperature probe thing for you guys?
We had, we had, um,
I mean, did you guys get to the point where you walked in the door and you were like being
no,
spot tested
no.
as you
We
came in?
could. We had them. We had the the thermometers that you could do that. It was more. It more became shift change. So you're the closest to a person during shift change. I have to hand over something to somebody, and they have to hook in, and then
Yeah, but
my
you guys don't share headsets and any of that anymore.
no, but if you were breathing, that was the closest you were going to be to somebody is when you did shift
Did you
change.
guys wear masks inside the control center?
Some did. Like I said, we had to wear, during shift change, you wore masks. And it was optional if you wanted to wear a mask while you were working. It would have driven me nuts. And I still don't think you would have been able to hear very well. I mean, I still think it would have been muffled. I don't know. But
Like Charlie Brown's school teacher?
not that
Womp,
bad.
womp,
No,
womp.
not that bad. But like for months, if someone coughed, they wore a mask because they coughed. And I mean, it
Isn't
just
that the most bizarre feel? I mean, you basically lived with 3 other people 8 hours a day
right,
and you did that in dispatch for 23 years.
right,
I mean, some dispatch centers are even longer than that. Some of those shifts are 12 hours a day. And I ran into a couple in my travels back in the pipeline industry where they worked dispatch 24 hours on, 48 off. They actually had chairs there, and they'd have 2 people on the mic
ugh,
overnight and people sleeping or whatever. So,
ugh,
but in
that's
most cases,
terrible.
dispatch centers, you're a family of your own, and it's usually 3 or 4 people. Where I was going with that is, it's just a bizarre thing that COVID-19 did to all of us, which was the whole, as I used to call it, the whole scarlet letter thing that, if you coughed or you sneezed,
Right,
it freaked people out. If you were allergic like we are,
right.
I sneeze a lot. I cough a lot because, I'm allergic to a lot of different
I
things.
think that was a little paranoia on some people's parts. I mean, in the store, if someone coughed, I mean, I, I I wasn't holding in a cough because I was afraid that someone was think that I had COVID. I mean, and what's crazy to think about now is that who knows who has it now because you don't. I mean, you do see some people with masks on, and I use Walmart as the example because that's the biggest store that I'm in, and I would say probably every time I go to our Walmart, there's at least one person that still has a mask
Yeah,
on.
I still run
But the
into I
rest
still
of
run
it,
into folks that wear
the
masks
rest of
from
the
time
people
to
are
time.
just like, "Ugh, whatever, it's just COVID now."
I think a lot of the, and I hesitate to say this because you're going to say you are the older population, but I think a lot of the older population, and I'm not there yet. I think you run into that a little bit more frequently here. I know in different parts of the country, the thought processes are different. I also think, and I'm not going to turn this podcast into that, but I think where you align yourself politically also is a thought process on whether or not you masked up and did all those things. Like, there are communities that were a lot more liberal than this one, liberal in politics and thinking, and Democrat than we are, that they still would wear masks where we don't.
But I hate to label that.
I don't want to label it
I
either,
don't
but
like
I
to
see it
label
that
that.
way.
I look at it more as a way of thinking.